everyone, Lou here. As the finale of my Rozen Maiden series of reviews, it's finally time to talk about my least favorite Rozen Maiden adaptation. While the original anime is very good with some flaws, and Troyman teeters on being Black Butler 2 levels of bad, 2013 has always been one that was mixed to me. What do I mean by that? Roll the intro and let's get started. Rozen Maiden 2013, or Rozen Maiden Rewind, is an adaptation of the second half of Rozen Maiden's manga made from 2008 to 2014. You see, the original duo behind Peach Pit had gotten really sick to a point where the previous publishing company for Rozen Maiden had cancelled the series, which is a dick move if you ask me. They were then picked up by Shueisha instead, where they continued the story in an alternate timeline that merged the original cliffhanger they left on with Kirakishou, thus were basically able to continue the story. This anime was made some time after the original adaptation, thus required a reboot, hence why it's called Rozen Maiden Zurückspulen, which means rewind. Sorry if that pronunciation is awful, by the way. My German pronunciation is honestly really rusty and kind of garbage. For the sake of not making any German viewers cringe, I'll be calling it Rozen Maiden Rewind. The anime was released on July 5th, 2013 and was directed by Shinichi Omata, who's actually been involved as a storyboarder for a lot of my favorite anime, like Black Butler and Madoka Magica, but their primary work as a director includes Kaguya-sama Love is War and Ground Control to Psycho Electric Girl. They also directed the least terrible episode of Dramatical Murders, so that's definitely something. Oddly enough though, this anime had more promotion compared to the original two series. The Pulip dolls were rebooted to promote the show, a contest was held to design your own 8th Rozen Maiden, a collab with Lolita fashion label Angelique Pretty, and several other big corporations that still collaborate to this day like mobile games. You'd think all this promotion would get a second season, right? Well, let's review this anime and find out. Now, we all know the story from the first season of Rozen Maiden, but to give it a refresher in case anyone new is watching, Jun Sakurada is a 14-year-old hikikomori who receives a Rozen Maiden doll named Shinku. He and the other Rozen Maidens basically try to fight against the Alice game while balancing the themes of emotional support, societal expectations, and existence. Now, the first episode is abysmal in my eyes. It rushes through basically 46 chapters of the original Rozen Maiden manga so fast that you can't even figure out what's going on. Honestly, this part feels like it's trying to shut up manga readers than it is for people who have never read the manga who want an animated version of it. Like, people complained the Promised Neverland skipped too much. Try skipping the first half of an entire story. Not even Berserk 2016 or the Promised Neverland did that. Ever since Jun wakes up Shinku in that episode, he is flung from doll to doll and place to place that we can't feel any attachment for any of the dolls in this series, when the entire point is to feel attachment for them. No one is going to feel intrigue by mentioning Sosei Seki and then she dies in the same episode. Hina Ichigo in particular suffers the most from this. In the manga, we've seen Hina Ichigo for as long as we did in the first two adaptations. Her death is equally as tragic in the manga, especially when she had just overcome her fear of abandonment and loneliness. In the anime, the only scene we get of her is her throwing a tantrum for Tomoe not to leave, where she's sucked into an empty room where her death proceeds according to the manga. I've had people see the 2013 anime only, and many of them told me they assumed Hina Ichigo was a spoiled brat who got what she deserved, because they never showed us her not being a spoiled brat and showed all this character development about her and us seeing how genuinely sweet she is. They tried to fix this by showing sweet moments with Jun, but the problem is that because Jun and Ichigo have never met in this continuity, the scene doesn't make any sense. I guess there's a third timeline now? Even So Seiseki's death, which is tragic because it shows just how blindly loyal she is, feels emotionless and empty because we literally do not know anything about her other than she is Sui Seiseki's twin. The reason why this is important is because it fucks up a lot of later plots and emotions we're supposed to feel this arc. If it brushes past everything, then we won't understand the characters and their motivation. Well, anyway, after basically summing up half the manga, we're thrown into the actual plot of Rozen Maiden 2013. You see, in Rozen Maiden, there are multiple different timelines and pocket dimensions. In this anime, we explore what happened if Jun never circled wine and instead chose to not wine. This adult Jun, who worked at a bookstore and has severe depression, he did eventually manage to come out of his room, but more like he forced himself rather than having actual friends and communication he needed to feel a more positive motivation to leave his room. It's never really explained how he went through high school. I guess he just remained homeschooled for that. But he did graduate and go to college, where he's basically a living husk of day-to-day life. To make this easy, we're gonna call this Unwound Jun. Unwound Jun feels pretty realistic in terms of how he's lived. A kid who was severely bullied for his interests, shuts himself away from society, and grows up to be an adult with depression and deep regret. I would also like to add that in this Unwound universe, the Rozen Maidens do not exist and no one has ever heard of one before. As Jun works at a bookstore, he unboxes a strange magazine with a doll-making kit inside of it. His boss tells him to throw it away, but as they never get any shipments like that for a doll-making kit, but Jun feels ignited by his old passion of crafting to build this doll. I'll be honest, a craft kit where you can build your own real Rozen Maiden is a really awesome concept, and I still kinda wish there was something like this in real life. Sounds like a really fun marketing strategy. When he comes home with the magazine and doll part, he finds a box delivered to him and assumes it's a package from Nori, but opens it up to find a Rozen Maiden case and another issue of this magazine. He's told with every issue of this magazine he will receive a part to make his very own Rozen Maiden doll. He reads later on that he will be making Shinku, the 5th Rozen Maiden doll, and it includes the tools he'll need to make her. I assume this is stuff like elastic to string her, sandpaper to smooth the casting, restringing tools, and other standard BJD resin necessities. Once a week, I guess, he receives a magazine where he polishes and slowly strings up Shinku together. Jun also builds a slow friendship with the girl he's working with named Saito, where for the first time in a shoujo manga is not a love interest for Jun in the slightest, so that's a thing. She invites him to a community theater play as her dream is to become an actress, where the two of them share some thoughts on how freeing it feels to be able to do what you want to do. In these episodes, we're also shown a storybook read by Shinku about a little girl who visits her uncle and receives several wishes from what I believe is supposed to be an allegory for Jun's life and how he needs to be careful over the things he wants to wish for. I think? Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because this isn't in the manga and I'm a little lost in the allegory for this storybook. Unwound Jun receives a message from his younger self in the world where he wound up the Rozen Maidens, who tries to tell him to be careful of Kirakishou because she's too powerful. He gives the gist in explaining that the Rozen Mystica and a Rozen Maiden are fragments that need to become whole again in order to become Rozen's dream daughter. We also find out as Unwound Jun is sewing Shinku's dress that the reason he became a shut-in is, as a kid, Jun really loved sewing and drawing. He even made dolls for his sister Nori and designed dresses, but he was made fun of it in school as many guys thought he was a freak for designing women's clothing when he's a guy. When Jun submitted his homework, his drawing for a school princess festival was shown in there where the teacher exposed Jun. Obviously the teacher wasn't doing maliciously, he was just trying to help and didn't understand that Jun was bullied by it because of his interests. But it caused Jun to have a massive panic attack as many guys in school were already making fun of him. and he was pretty much traumatized. He then immediately shut himself away from society due to this bullying and severe panic attack. When Unwound Jun sleeps that night, he's immediately attacked by Kirakishou and awakens in a room filled with nothing but doll heads. Kirakishou's powers is to invade the dreams of people, known sometimes as the Enfield, manipulate timelines and pocket dimensions, along with manipulating white vines. So yeah, Kirakishou is kind of OP. Now that Jun has fully assembled Shinku and wound her up, a different sort of slice of life's antics works with the Unwound Jun and Shinku. Though Jun's life is turning around for the better now that Shinku has helped him come out of his shell, Shinku's own life is a replica body though that will only last a week. Suiginto eventually shows up where the two of them have to unfortunately work together as Suiginto's medium Megu has been kidnapped by Kirakishou. They did a lot better job at showing a flashback between Megu and Suiginto and their relationship. As stated, just as Suiginto and Megu formed a contract, Kirakishou came to kidnap Megu. I'd also love to give bonus at the slight foreshadowing if anyone reads the manga and knows what happens to Megu there. This leaves both Shinku and Suiginto without their mediums and a chance to actually bond while living with the Unwound Jun. But Unwound Jun mysteriously receives more parts that allegedly is from Jun, but that's clearly not the case. Jun figures this out as well as he receives messages from Unwound Jun about it, so he talks with Kanari's medium Mi-chan where they figure out that Unwound Jun is receiving fake doll parts likely from Kirakishou. I'd also like to mention that Mi-chan feels like a call-out post for me. I would recommend seeing my Rozen Maiden Rewind video if you want to know more. This is all important though because the world of Rozen Maiden and the world without them will merge for a split second during a waning moon because timeline merge theory, I guess. It's confusing and shows just how fucking weird Rozen Maiden gets sometimes. When this time happens, because Unwound Jun made a body for Kirakishou when he was warned not to, she comes to the physical Unwound world. You see, the problem with Kirakishou is that she doesn't physically exist. Rozen made her artificial soul, spirit, and concept art, but he disappeared before he could get a chance to make her physical body. So Kirakishou is a doll that only exists in dreams, pocket dimensions, and gaps in reality. Her goal is to make a body so she can physically exist and become the perfect doll for Rozen, whom abandoned her before he could even make her. We also find out that the reason Kirakishou is so powerful is because she has stolen the souls of all the Rozen Maiden doll's previous masters. I have no idea how that works, but it's Rozen Maiden, so I wouldn't question it. However, the body that Kirakishou is using is also a stolen body. If you remember earlier, Sosei Seki fairly lost the Rozen Maiden game, so Kirakishou's vines came to steal her body and used Unwound Jun to reassemble it to make it in her image. But it clearly isn't working as she's forcefully trying to possess one of her own sisters, which is impossible. To sum up the finale, because a lot of wacky stuff and universe and shenanigans happen, Sosei Seki is rescued from Kirakishou by Suisei Seki. Unwound Jun finally crawls out of his depression with a newfound sense of hope and happiness within him. Kirakishou is in a damaged state from losing the fight, and we find out that Shinku's temporary body was actually Hina Ichigo's body. Time and everything is saved when Jun finds Shinku's real body to finally bring the real Shinku back from the dead, and Unwound Jun goes back to his own timeline with Kirakishou defeated and the world put back in place so time doesn't explode. Though Kirakishou vows she is not done because she will do anything to become real. Although Unwound Jun is lonely now without the Rozen Maidens, but hey, his life is actually going around for the better. He at least hopes they're doing alright. And Jun is finally going back to school. Though it's unfortunate the anime ended when Jun fell asleep and fell down the staircases because of a certain point in the manga that is so damn confusing that I don't even think I'm gonna touch on it because it's just a headache. Shinku, Suisei Seki, Sosei Seki, and Kanaria discover that Kirakishou is up to no good, where they plan to go rescue Jun from her again, with Kanaria showing doubts in this battle. though Mi-chan is now kidnapped by Kirakishou's ugly bootleg that she attempted to make herself because she is that desperate to physically exist. They contact Unwound Jun, who goes to the end field where the anime ends. I assume it was supposed to get a second season, but it never did. While it did a decent job telling the first arc of Rozen Maiden's second manga, especially with Suiginto and Unwound Jun, the problem here is the pacing. In places that didn't really need such a slow start, it gives one to build up that doesn't even feel satisfying because it's for characters that they didn't establish, so therefore we don't feel anything for them. While I do think it did a decent job of telling the story certain parts of the manga, the pacing here is an absolute mess that it honestly leaves this anime story feeling very mixed to me. If you ask me, I would have preferred a movie or something summing up the first half instead of making a single episode summing up an entire series, as I think that would have also built up more hype and given us more time to root for these characters later on. Not to mention that this story with Jun and Unwound Jun is not my favorite in the Rozen Maiden manga. Let me say, it fucking sucks that we never got a second season because the finale arc for Rozen Maiden is actually my favorite. It's insane, but I just really love the ending and I'm salty we're never gonna see it. And I don't particularly want to sum up the ending for Rozen Maiden's manga because it's extremely complicated and honestly sometimes in that manga I don't even know what's happening. Overall, this story's pacing is kind of a fucking mess, but I do enjoy the parts that it actually manages to get right. There's only two characters worth discussing here, as I've discussed Shinku and the others in previous videos about Rozen Maiden, and there isn't really much of a difference in opinion other than Sosei Seki isn't a stupid bitch like she is in Troyment. Kirakishou is the 7th Rozen Maiden doll, and I think she is the most interesting character next to Suiginto in this anime and the manga. She challenges a lot more interesting concepts like existence and all that. She even contrasts Suiginto, who kind of regrets her existence because she was a failure of a first Rozen Maiden, while Kirakishou desperately wishes to exist as a 7th Rozen Maiden. Unwound Jun is also pretty interesting here because he's basically showing us what would have happened if Jun never met the Rozen Maidens, and I just really like him. He's also a very interesting character, and I can imagine a lot of people in this day and age relating to an Unwound Jun. That's it really here, solely because my opinions on all characters haven't really changed, as I said earlier. Overall, I do still love the characters, but it is a shame that a lot of characters don't get a chance to shine because of the rushed pacing. This is the part I will forever praise. The art style for this anime is gorgeous, and although the anime can be a little clunky sometimes, some of the animation was pretty good, especially with Kirakishou here, where she's animated very fluid, but they also did a pretty good job animating her complicated design with all things considered. I mean, she's a character covered in roses, that must be a bitch to animate. Though Suiginto's wings were pretty lazy this time. I know her wings are drawn a lot lighter in the manga compared to the first anime, but it still feels a little lazy that her wings were clearly 3D. While some shots look pretty good where you can't totally tell, there were definitely some shots where it looked obvious and really cheap. The doll cases when they fly were also in 3D, and while it looked okay sometimes, I am a little more fair because it's a lot harder to animate a square flying through the air than feathery wings. Though something about Jun's boss in this art style really bothers me, he just looks really off for some reason. The color palette is also really pretty with lots of really soft browns and cream colored hues this time. It kind of makes the anime's color scheme feel more like a storybook, but I guess that's always been the vibe Rozen Maiden was after. Overall, I really love the animation here. Sometimes it genuinely looks beautiful, and even when it's clunky, it still looks really nice. Although this isn't Rozen Maiden Troyman levels of bad, I still don't care too much for the way the 2013 anime managed to tell the story of the manga. The pacing is gosh awful. The emotions behind certain scenes are just completely lost due to this pacing issue, and it explains certain characters too much instead of letting us see the emotion of the character. Though I will give it praise towards the animation for looking so nice and how it handled certain stories correctly, and I just don't particularly care for the way this anime was told. Considering Rozen Maiden Rewind sits at 1.5 stars on Crunchyroll, I'd say there's a semi-decent amount of people who are gonna agree with me that this anime is not great. If you are going to watch this though, please don't watch the English dub. For some reason, the entire dub cast was changed and most of it sounds pretty bland. While I love Sui Seiseki and Adult Jun's voices, the rest is pretty damn awful. The scripting is also particularly bad with Adult Jun for throwing in weird hip lines he didn't say in the original version, and the acting in particular for a lot of characters was just fucking garbage. Especially all the human characters Unwound Jun knows, and Wound Jun in particular sounds the worst. No offense to the actress, but she really did sound like some kind of bad Ash Ketchum impersonation. Then again, this dub was done by Sentai Filmworks, so should I really be surprised it's awful when Sentai Filmworks are the kings of mediocre dubs or downright awful dubs? If you ask me, I think despite the heavy promotion for this anime, I think the reason it largely failed, aside from its terrible pacing, was because of how rushed it was and the poor timing of its release. At the time, Crunchyroll had just reinvented itself as a legitimate streaming service thanks to the popularity of anime like Attack on Titan and Free. I think though, had this anime come out now, it might have gotten people to actually watch it, but due to the timing, then almost no one saw this anime, as unfortunate as that is. Overall, Rozen Maiden 2013 is not my favorite story-wise for Rozen Maiden, and I really wish it did a better job telling the story, but the animation is beautiful, and it still is nice to see the adventures of my favorite talking dolls. Well, that's it for this video. This is the last video I'm doing on Rozen Maiden unless another studio somehow manages to make an adaptation. I won't be doing a video explaining the manga story because that's out of the realm of my expertise because of how complicated the story gets near the end. Hell, writing this video in general was a headache because of how difficult it is to explain the Enfield and Kirakishou's OP powers. Rozen Maiden Zero is a good read though if you want to check it out. It's just not detailed for a full review because it's incredibly short. Totally read it though if you want to read something similar to the Overture OVA. Let me know down below what you guys think. Do you plan to read the manga now? As always, let me know down below. Hey guys, thanks for watching! If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you're new. And if any older new subs would like to help support the channel in any possible way, my Ko-fi page is down below in the description along with all of my social media. For any subscribers, new or old, who would like to help with video ideas or maybe just want to talk about anime or something, then I have a fan server linked down below. See you next time!